At 2 p.m., Douglas Ewart will be performing with Nija in Rio Negro. So there'll be a slight pause after this for breaks, and then we'll get over there. And then at 7 p.m. tonight, there'll be a documentary screening at iHouse. That'll be quite lovely, and so please come for that as well. Then we take a slight pause and end the Shout things until November 9th to the 13th, when we have a series of events with Raul de Nieves, who will be coming down with a bunch of his groups. And that schedule will be announced like next week, basically. For now, can also say that for those who are interested in things freedom principle-ish, there will be a conversation on October 26th with Naomi Beckwith, Dieter Rollstadt, and myself about the exhibition. And so you're happy to come back to that. It's a Wednesday, 6:30. And aside from that, maybe I'll only say a couple other things. One thing George is constantly revising, revisiting, reworking, fiddling with is a website, personalshout.com, which is a sort of piece that you can perform, play with. It has sound clips and video clips and images from all the different End the Shout participants, and it will be changing over the weeks. It's meant for smartphones.
Loaded it. Sorry about that, my voice. You tap anywhere, and then suddenly you should be getting wonderful sounds if it is working, but sometimes it isn't.
Yeah.
Oh, there we are, great. Oh, there we are. There's the Terry Atkins.
It already goes.
And you can, oh, there he is, there he is, there he is. I'm looking for Black Beethoven, there he is. He's sort of hiding out. Then you tap again, or shake. And you can pan and scan. It's kind of hard for me to show you. It's personal, that's why it's personal. You know.
You too can interrupt my talk.
So just well, that was the idea. I thought that was my cue, I'm sorry.
And so with
or
that,
you can do it too. There you go. I thought that was my cue. Sorry.
I will just like to say thanks to the Pew Center for Arts and Heritage, who have helped make all of these things happen. And it's great to have one of the several events where the sort of lines between freedom principle and End the Shout blur, because of course Jenny has two wonderful pieces in the exhibition. So with that, I'll leave it to these two.
Thanks a lot. Well, you know, it's extraordinary because I've been kind of chasing Jenny around the world for a couple of years now, you know, ever since I heard about her work, and the art forum people asked me to create a blurb for the, was it the Smithsonian?
Yes, the Hirshhorn exhibition, Higher Resonance.
Yeah, and so I made about 100, gave me 140 words, which clearly was not anywhere near enough. And so, I mean, for someone who does all the things she does, it's like that multi-voiced artist that I'm always trying to.
But George wrote the most amazing haiku that was better than any artist statement I've ever written in my whole life, in that 150 words.
Oh yeah, 150 word haiku. In other words, 150 by 5 lines. It's a lot. It's something else. But you know, she's doing this incredible work, these sound art collages, and immersive sound installations, sculptures, works on paper, all kinds of things. And there's this, you know, I've noticed in your work, there's this sharp engagement with histories and memories of sound and music. This is the piece that's in the show upstairs, Quiet Gray with the Red Reverberation #2. There's a series of these?
There was a body of work from Tone, which is the exhibition where I had the Melba Liston piece, which we'll talk about later. Yeah. So that was one of two sisters, kind of.
Well, let me ask you this. You said the red is reverberation. We see all these things in your work like reverberation or metaphors relating to sound, and this piece in particular, in fact, a series of these pieces are functional, I think, in terms of sound. I mean, that's my take on it. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I started as a painter a million years ago and left painting and took a very long sort of walkabout before coming back to the dreaded canvas. And I was only able to do that through a deep investigation into materials and always sort of saw painting more as an object than painting as a window. Painting isn't necessarily a picture-making device, but that it is a functional object in a room. And so to start there with painting as an object in a room leads into the physics of acoustics in the space and how objects in a room affect sound. So after sort of going on these two separate paths, working with acoustic panels and integrating sound-absorbing materials into the work visually, finally built this bridge. So I wasn't just making a sound piece and having drawings like that sort of were illustrative, but trying to sort of merge those two things in one space.
Yeah, because, I mean, you can think about this one, which I got very excited about. Let's see if we can show that. This one. Well, I'm excited about all these, but there's a bunch of these. I mean, I don't even know what some of these things are. I mean, what's a bass trap?
I got these used from a guy in California who was disassembling his recording studio, and he made these bass traps. They fit in the corners. So this has been taken to the floor and put on a pedestal and inverted and with feet put on it. But it's usually they go in the corners of the studio. So they're packed with mineral wool and fiberglass, and they're mounted one in each corner in recording studios to literally be bass traps to absorb the lower frequencies in recording studios. But so they don't always look like this. This was kind of one of those nuts that a gearhead nut that was making his own equipment, and then I took it from him and repurposed it.
I mean, if you look at this, the thing that amazes me about it is that it's got to have the same function in a gallery or in any space as it does in a recording studio. It's sort of like it's almost as if it's absorbing sound. You can listen to its effect, even though it's not making sound itself. And that's one of the interesting things about you as a sound artist, is that you take absorption. It's not just broadcasting, or it's absorbing sound. And you had an exhibition called Absorption and Diffusion. Could you talk about that?
That was the first exhibition at the Kitchen in 2011, and that was the first exhibition where I started incorporating these materials and sort of left the more illustrative methods that I was just talking about, where I was doing a lot more drawing of sound, looking at how things are connected, and now we're wireless, so even those feel a little bit dated already, just in a decade. But so the exhibition at the Kitchen, Absorb, Diffuse, also was the first time I really edited a sound piece that was completely instrumental. I'd always sort of leaned a little bit on the poetics of lyrics and working with the song lyrics, but that was a tremendous launching pad for me, that show, and it opened up a lot of other ways of thinking, and led to, then Evelyn Hankins from the Hirshhorn comes to my apartment, and where I was working at, and sits on the end of my bed because I had no studio, and we talked about modernism and minimalism and sound and the politics of what it is to be absorbed and consumed, which I hope is a metaphor in the work as well. And she gave me my first museum show. So that show at the Kitchen, which you were at yourself once for many years, is still such an important platform for experimental work.
Yep, I was at the Kitchen way back in the halcyon days of the 80s. And a piece that was premiered there, Douglas Ewart's Bamboo Forest, became the basis for Rio Negro, which you'll see outside, which you see in the downstairs gallery. So a lot of wonderful things happened at the Kitchen before, during, and after the time that I was there, which is from 1982. But a lot of it, at least in my time of being there, was around challenging comfortable assumptions about place. And I mean, when I don't mean geographical place, but I mean the place of artists, especially artists who didn't fit the standard models. And so this is what I wanted to sort of go here a little bit. This is the Tate Modern website, and it's very informative. I mean, this one is all about sound art. It's art which uses sound both as its medium, what it is made out of, and as its subject, what it's about. And see, the thing is about, that's already too narrow a definition for what Jennie is doing. I mean, the very first piece, I mean, this piece, you know, it's not, you know, this thing isn't made out of sound, but it still engages sound in a very dramatic way, and in one that, so that's the first stretching of the definition, and there are more to come, as I see it. And the other thing is, you know, there's some wonderful people like Susan Phillips, who was the first sound artist to win the, what is the Turner Prize, which is that huge prize.
Yeah.
And there's Kurt Schwitters, and then you've got, you know, the Swiss, the Swiss sound artists who, they didn't have sound artists in 1932. They were still called composers. And so, the famous piece is called the Ur Sonata, you know, and it sort of sounds a bit like this. That kind of thing, you know. I'm pretty bad at that. But you get, I could, you know. But you know, I mean, it was all Ur Sonata means Ur, German means primordial, and so you've got and it's using these primordial Indo-European syllables. Everything that comes out Indo. It's sort of the thing you find now that when they tell you nowadays to write a piece with the voice and you're going to make weird sounds, they tell you to use the International Phonetic Alphabet, or IPA. But at this time, they didn't have that either. So if people were saying, oh, this is an Ur text, it meant a primordial European Ur text. And so that's sort of the problem with this. This is like when you look at what goes on, it's all about, you know, the usual suspects. You know, Rousselot, it's great. Rousselot, the fascist, who they don't talk about that, but it's all Marinetti, you know, F.G. Marinetti and those people. And Dada, Surrealism, Duchamp, Cage, and other wonderful people. I mean, Bill Fontana, there's a lot of people there. Bruce Nauman, it's fantastic. Now, you know, I can't help it. I look at this and I say, hey, where's Jennie on this list? She's as cool as anybody else in this list. And where are the other people of color, for example? Where are those people, man? I mean, like, how do they leave those off?
But what's interesting about the territory that I try to dig into, and what we were talking about at first, is like when we think about even performance art and how performance art and sound art bump up against each other, or how experimental or avant-garde music and jazz bumps up against these things too, but they never quite make it into each other's histories and each other's narratives or stories.
Yeah. And
to, like when we're talking about this Rashawn Roland Kirk film where he's with Cage, it's a film called Sounds from 1966, and the narratives run parallel, but they're never in the same shot, and that's sort of a way to frame it. They cut back and forth from Kirk performing what kind of looks like it could, you know, be even connected to Ben Patterson, what Kirk is doing, and getting audience to participate, passing out slide whistles, and really engaging the audience in this performative way that tips its hat to performance art and kind of talks about jazz and talks about sound art all at once, and then they show Cage completely separately having these profound moments and having these asides about listening.
Portentously profound moments. And I don't know, I love that film because it sort of reifies in terms of montage the kinds of separations we're talking about. And this is something I've, you know, always been a little concerned with about histories of sound, histories of music. You know, it all comes from an offhand remark that Cecilia Doherty, the video artist, made at a Bard seminar. She said, well, in all of these histories, what you want to ask first is, where are the women? And so once you ask that, then you start getting, or you can ask, where are the whatevers? Because often people aren't there, and so you wonder why they're not there. My work on, like you mentioned, Ben Patterson, I've written a bunch of stuff on Ben Patterson, including this art forum piece I just finished, which is going to be published any day now. And my beef is really with the historians. It's not, when you look at the artists, they all say, oh yeah, Ben was right there with us.
Yeah.
Emmett Williams, you know, Allison Knowles, everybody. But then the historians, they kind of snip the guy off. And so like, well, what are you doing? How can you do that? And so when I look at this kind of historical thing, I see John Paul Corte. I haven't heard from him in a million years. But I mean, like, I was thinking, what about Terry? You know, Terry Atkins.
Yeah.
What about, you know, Mendy and Keith, you know, Obadike? We were talking about the Nick Cave sound suits. and Charles Gaines, who's also in this show. There's a lot of people out there. I mean, there's plenty. So what we have to do is be a little bit more vigilant and place pressure on these kinds of narratives. But the only way to do it is for everybody in the audience now you can all do your part. You can all come to these shows and ask, hey, where is everybody? And you'll have plenty of opportunity to do it, I guarantee you. It won't be a real lack of that. So, I mean, because you talked about modernism, minimalism, and jazz, which are three sort of huge, almost ready-mades at this point, you know. So, but those are like themes in your work, or sort of things to react against?
Yeah, I feel like they're almost, it's almost an alphabet that I can play with to reconstruct my own sentences and my own paragraphs using some of that very coded kind of formal methodology, which was my natural leaning, has always been very formal and very minimal, and that too took some time to reconcile, because it's not particularly a profitable or popular way for a black woman to be making visual work. But that language and my ability to hopefully sort of reposition it and to make sort of moments of revisionist history by putting things in a different context and by equating formalism to the modern jazz quartet is a way to kick that open and bridging, connecting Coltrane with Abex or whatever these parallels that were happening historically anyway, but using that as a very rich soil to then take off from and push from in my own work.
Well, you just pointed out another one that I wanted to unpack a little bit about minimalism not being the most profitable engagement for a black woman. I mean, you feel like saying more about that, or, I mean, like...
No, except I still have a lot of student loans, and I've been in my same crappy apartment.
I mean, that's very upfront. I mean, when I looked at, I have an article now about Julius Eastman, who was, gay black singer, composer. A lot of us knew him, and who passed away a number of years ago. And there's a new book about his work called Gay Gorilla, which is the name of one of his pieces. And so Julius, certainly right there at the origins of sonic minimalism, but never seems to quite get there with historians until very recently, when people like Mary Jane Leach and Renee Levine Packer, who edited this Gay Gorilla book, have put Julius back into that group, and sort of, because there's always something where maybe it's I mean, student loans are maybe one part of it, but also just the framing that somehow minimalism isn't where black people reside.
Well, of course. We rip the Band-Aid off and we have to talk about how the arts in general are more market-driven than they've ever been. And how does one participate in the system that's already broken? Or do you woodshed, like I was saying before, which is you just hunker down on your own and let that just continue on while you continue doing your thing until, maybe 50 years after you're gone, they realize that was a critical voice that was not included in the discourse because it wasn't profitable for institutions or private galleries. But I am in the world that's very different from your world in the sense of commercial galleries and having a lot of sort of heartbreak over how they dictate cultural politics and discourses.
But where they combine, I think, and part of my job, I think, is more as a person who writes than as a composer, is to speed up that process. To really, let's not have it be 50 years. Let's have it be like next week, or let's have it be right at the outset that you sort of see, oh wow, that you use your ears instead of using, racism or something, which makes you deaf. And so the idea is that you instead of doing that, what you end up with, if you're able to hear through the noise, then you can obviously hear John Coltrane, as being an early minimalist, I mean, if you're listening to the McCoy-Tyner
This is
solo
what
on
you
the
referenced
first
in the
in
essay.
1960.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I
was
have the
so
same
good.
hobby horses.
It was so
Eventually
but it was so perfect,
yeah.
and it made me listen to that with a new perspective.
Yeah, because it was just obvious. That if those of you who know the piece, McCoy-Tyner is playing this solo. It's just the same stuff repeated over and over again. And the date is right. It's 1960. You know, we're talking about, you know, what is it, Lamont Young Trio for Strings. I think that's 57. You know, and Coltrane being a strong influence on the soprano saxophone on both Lamont and Terry Riley. And among others, Terry Jennings. I mean, there are all these Coltrane-influenced minimalist saxophone players out there who we don't hear about for the same reason people don't seem to think, for example, in a thing like Ben Patterson's lick piece, that there is anything other than gender transgression in the image of Ben Patterson licking whipped cream off this white woman's body, an act for which you could be lynched in large segments of the U.S. And people are, I guess, trying to bring that back now, although hopefully they won't succeed, this alt-right group and so on. But didn't want to get too far away from your themes, this business of, this jazz thing. Like, where does it, because you said that there were these parallels between jazz and...
Well, I have this, like, for many years, and even now, like, there's a part of me that just goes like this when I hear the word jazz, because I feel like it's been, like, I immediately associate it with how much it was hijacked by Ken Burns' jazz, PBS, and that sort of jazz with a capital Lincoln Center J, which is problematic in its own right for what they include and don't include in that history, and whose story, you know, how long can we take the A train kind of thing. But I mean, it's hard to pinpoint that influence, except for me it was a point of liberation. It was a point of saying, that's what I'm interested in, that's what I'm talking about. There's an edgy freedom that is existing that is intangible and more ephemeral than being stuck in with the object making and picture making of visual art, and how long it took me to sort of play with that space to find a methodology for myself that would satisfy both of those.
Well, like something like this one, which is this blues in C-sharp minor for Teddy Wilson. I mean, is that a kind of synesthesia taking place there, the blue,
A little bit.
Beyond just the obvious, oh, it's the blues, but it's just like, what's going on there?
Yeah.
Because it's still one of those acoustic pieces.
The first and I don't know when to say the last, but I always avoided blue for that very reason.
But suddenly you got this one in there. Look at the blue surge.
It completed like a tritone kind of theme for the show at the Contemporary Museum, because I'd only been really working with very hot colors as a way to talk about reverberation and to think about optics and sonic relationships. So like the red pieces often bounce off of the wall like the glow from this sign and create a different kind of optic pairing with the sonic. So blue is something that's that grabs light and doesn't give off light, just as a pigment, as a color, was something I avoided for a while, but it made sense for the Contemporary Museum in Houston show to sort of wrap up the decade with this tritone thing. And the first moments, the first pieces where I start to get more gestural, and the show that was just up was incredibly aggressive for me and expressive for me, and so I'm kind of starting to fuck around with painting as painting again, and push up silence with noise. That painting and gesture as noise, and the acoustic absorbers then can function as the end of a measure or as a silencing marker.
So how does Teddy Wilson come into the dedication? I mean, he's a cool guy, right?
I just felt like that sharp edge was totally a C-sharp edge. I mean, sometimes it is just a little hair of a moment that makes me think of a song, that makes me think of a title, and they marry. And I don't often give titles specifically in that way, but it clicked.
Well, Oh, it's amazing. I mean, let me go on to another part of what you do, because there's so much of what you do. I'm interested in how you deal with consumption patterns, you know, flows, you know, transmission media. I mean, you've been looking at these things. It's not, they're absorption media, but you're also dealing directly with how sound is transmitted, you know, like or how it travels, like pieces like this, you know. You can take these, I mean, is that, I'm getting the sense, for example, if there's like something simple like a cassette box or something like that. Basically, we use these boxes, and people still use them around the world. It's not all taking place through the internet. People take a little cassette or a little CD, and they put it in their pocket, and it comes out, and they go somewhere in the other part of the world, and they pull it out, you know. Or they had a thing, a friend of mine told me this, that he visited, I think it was Dakar, and they had, this is quite a few years ago, and what would happen is the band would play, and then I saw it for myself. I went to Dakar and I saw it for myself, that club called Chosan, I guess, where Youssou N'Dour, they play every night or something like that. And he did play that night too. But I mean, you sit there. I was sitting right up in the front, you know, like I like to do. I like to sit in the front, you know. And you sit in the front, and every so often the drummer or the keyboard player, they toss you a little bone. They look at you and they do something cool, like, and then you're thrilled by that. It's amazing. And then what happens is after the gig, you can buy the cassette.
Right.
Or they take it to the store the next day and you can buy it in the store. So the physical object goes, the physical transmission of things, I think, is something that comes up quite a bit in your pieces.
I kind of feel like I don't know if I'm a Gen Xer. I don't know what I am, but in that witnessing sort of the loss of the physical of that with listening and how we listen and how we, you know, but we don't walk across the room. That a record can make you stand up and walk across the room and turn it over and have a pause and have a moment and have that anticipation of what's on the next side, or liner notes, or folding out the double gatefold albums and being like blown away. That relationship is gone. It was interesting when they first had the first iPods were just scrolling those little gray screens, and it was just information. And I think people can handle it. Then they bought the album covers back as icons that you could swipe through, but without any of the criticality, right? So the liner notes are gone, the essays are gone. Sometimes you're even like, well, who's playing drums on that? And you have no access to even know anything besides the album cover image and the title of the album. And then you can choose, you know, one song by the most popular song and miss everything that's on the B side and not pay any attention to how it was curated or organized, because there's an order, clearly, that was mindfully thought of, as what song will come first and what song will be last. And so that kind of, that bums me out. that's gone. And I feel like I have a hard time navigating music digitally. It's almost overwhelming. I get very excited if I put a CD in and the database can't find it. I'm like, ah!
Well, you know, the other thing is, and I think this is something that you get into the critique of the cultural critique that your work embodies and enacts, really, is that a lot of these, when the iPads came out and the curatorial, I mean, who did curate these
Exactly.
things? Somebody did. And it turns out that major corporations curated them. And I'll tell you a story. Here's what I found out. I made a record for a label. The record is called Les Exercices Spirituels. It's like a octet, you know, with sound spatialization. And under normal circumstances, it would be called a kind of contemporary classical music. Nobody's improvising or playing any hot licks. They're just playing what I wrote, right, for a long time. So anyway, so I get the record, and I get the CD, and I stick it in there, and it says the genre is jazz. I said, well, how did you get that? How did you get that? So I asked the company, I said, well, how did that turn up? So we didn't do it. So we put in the genre. We always put in avant-garde or classical. So I said, could you find out? So they wrote to you know these things you do where you hit the button on the iTunes and it says, you want to send information to Grace Note. So they called up Grace Note.
Wow.
And it turns out that Grace Note, well, they sort of dissembled about what they said. They said that they were crowdsourcing these genres, which turned out not to be true. They did that at the very first when they first started. So in other words, if 100 people who looked on Wikipedia saw jazz in your Wikipedia site, then that became what your genre was. So it was as simple as that. But then later, that becomes reified when Grace Note is bought by the Tribune Corporation. And so that happens about 2013. And so major corporations, this is thinking like the difference in some ways between the visual and the sonic. In black music being a highly commodified, perhaps the most commodified and policed music in the history of the world, precisely because of the power. So, but that power, they see it as needing channeling and needing curation. That's a gentle word. I would call it channeling, like the old manual they had a pamphlet called Channeling during the 60s for the Selective Service as to why they were giving people deferment so they could channel them into productive capacities. So that is challenge people of means into productive capacities like teaching and getting deferments and channeling other people to the Vietnam War. So if you're looking at something like this, for example, this is the one where you're talking about noise-canceling instrument cable ties. I mean, what are these? What do these elements mean to you? It's very interesting. I mean, there's a whole scholarship now on noise cancellation. So there's a lot of people writing about noise-canceling headphones. But what is it? And you preceded all that with this.
So in 2010, actually before the kitchen show, I was looking at empty, the song containers, empty CD cases, and sort of systems of removal that would operate also in terms of system removal, historic removal. And that exhibition was called Electric. It was at Sycamore Jenkins. And that was when I made what I think everyone that makes sound art has to have their 4-3-3 exorcism. So I made my 4-3-3 exorcism, which was 4 minutes and 33 seconds of the opening chords of Miles Davis in a silent way. And so it's only Herbie Hancock's chords in the beginning. And it's stretched out over 4 minutes and 33 seconds. So Miles is never present. It talks, I mean, if you don't know that album, that was sort of like when Dylan went electric, like when I think when Miles Davis and Herbie Hancock made that album, it had the same sort of like, why is there an electric keyboard with Miles Davis kind of moment. I could be wrong. You're looking at me like, no, you're making it up.
No, I'm amazed. I didn't realize the 4 minutes and 33 seconds connection. I didn't get that. And the other thing is, on my machine, it's 4 minutes and 35 seconds.
Damn you, digital world, and your accuracy. It's adding the silence, right? It's adding the...
and we can hear some of it if you want.
Please
go ahead.
So I came to working with the cables because of the connection to the theme of electric and looking at being unplugged or plugged, and then also kind of wanting to comment on the white box gallery space as a dead space that's not, and it's sort of feeding back into itself, plugging into one spot and cycling in this kind of silent loop in the wall.
Wow. Can I play something? Because that would get us to a next part of what we're talking about, which I wanted to talk about what you do when you make sound, because you're making sound it's a big part of the work. But this is the first part of this piece. It's called, what is it? What's the full title? It's called
Slowly in a Silent Way, Caged.
Okay. like bass. I mean, a lot of these pieces have this fantastic low, you really get into the low sounds. Is that true, or is that just
Maybe.
my impression?
Yeah. Huh.
I mean, maybe it's because, you know, the way bass tones work in acoustics, right? I mean, like, they diffuse all over the space.
Yeah.
They're not directional like high-pitched sounds
Yeah.
are, so they diffuse. And then you've got these things, these traps here that absorb them. So it's pretty extraordinary. And there's one other thing. Yeah, go ahead.
No, just one thing about that piece in particular. I had kind of had a couple of moments trapped in headphones, and that's really horrible. And like in terms of installation and part of that is the acoustics of a white box gallery where most of this work lived is pretty horrible. So it actually, instead of fighting that space, I started making sound pieces that would benefit from being echoey and floating. So maybe that's part of the space thing, is that if you're going to have a sound piece in a room that has cement floors and big metal beams and white drywall everywhere, that why not just let the sound piece be influenced and expanded in that space instead of trying so hard to fight it. So that sort of started affecting the way I was editing sound too.
That's in the venerable tradition of chamber music. You know, we know what the sound is going, we know what the space is going to be like. And so we compose the music for the space. So it seems like you're composing music for a space that has a visual art issue and counter quite often, is that?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, you know, there's a whole bunch of these things, but I know people wanted to ask questions, but we're not quite ready for you yet. But because I had a burning question I wanted to ask Jennie, and this comes down to this, and there it is right there. You can see it on my list, because there's a lot of other things here, and we won't get to them all because no one can get to everything. But I have two more things I want to take up with you. First of all, this business of scores. I mean, you're really into scores. Here's a bar line. Okay, this is one of the combining the acoustic absorption with, you know, a metaphor of the score. Then there are actual scores that you could play. Did anybody ever play these?
Yeah, I've won oh my God, now I'm going to forget his name. Oh, this kid in Houston sort of challenged me about the scores. I thought I was going to send you that. Yeah, it's going to come to me while I'm talking. No.
Jamal Cyrus.
So we had this big debate about scores, about the visual art world co-opting this term score, and what that really means, if they're functional or not functional, or if they're then just visual. And it sort of felt like there was enough information in the way I was making these collages that they could be played, because maybe that's something you can speak to, because at some point you could call anything a score because it's about interpretation, right?
I think that's right.
So with or without having any music notation nods or notes or little kind of hints that this is actually playable, anything is. So that was the big debate.
About whether
a lot of these scores were actually functioning as scores that could be played.
I don't know. I think you could play this, or you could play this one.
Yeah.
This is, it's kind of hard to see. I might be able to blow it up a little bit. This is your, what is it, score and 8 measures. A part of it, there's 8.
Yeah.
There's 8 pieces in this score from Melba Liston, and then you have this other one, which isn't really a score, but it's kind of more like your container motif, which is called The Gentle Influence of the Bourgeoisie. What's the total title? Is it gentle? Is that the total title?
Yeah.
Gentle, and then it says Trombone Improvisation. So Melba Liston, the great trombonist and arranger, and the other trombonist you're referencing is Paul Rutherford. Now, what about this trombone thing? I mean, I play the trombone myself. So,
I know.
I was just wondering, because, you know, a lot of people really don't.
I have your solo
People
trombone.
don't like trombones. So.
I think.
Oh, you do?
I think why I'm fascinated with the trombone is super nerdy and conceptual, which is that because you find your notes in space, it's just, for me, fascinating to watch and to see how one finds your notes in physical space in that way. And also, I think all wind instruments, for me, connect more deeply to existential, spiritual kind of things because of the breath itself and because of breathing and what that does and what that breath gives. That's not a voice, but channeling through something else. So out of all the horns, the trombone is the most fascinating to me because of that spatial relationship.
The trombone's a real 2D kind of instrument, I think.
Oh, let's go there. Tell me.
Well,
that's your instrument.
Well, you can. Yeah, it's the only one I could really get it together to play. But before we do, the rest of them I'm terrible at, But I mean, this is something I came across. This is sort of done in homage to Jenny's fascination with Melba Liston. Now, one of the people with whom Melba Liston worked the most was Randy Weston, the pianist and composer, and she arranged virtually everything that he did after 1960. And and if you look at Randy's book, African Rhythms, I mean, there's like, she's practically on every other page. I mean, he revered her. And the only reason why I went on tour with him, I went to France for a week, and the thing was that Melba couldn't come because she was too sick. So Cale Smith came instead, which is great. But I mean, it would have been great to have had both of them, but that was, so I didn't get a chance to actually meet her. But I mean, like, this is just a couple of clips just to get you in. I mean, it's amazing you've done so much with her and her work. But then you shift gears with this gentle harm of the bourgeoisie thing.
Well, they're not in order of having been made. I mean,
which one was made first?
The Rutherford.
That was first?
Yeah, that was years ago. That was probably 2009. And then Tone was this exhibition in 2014, where the sound piece and the score was for Melba. And the other reason I like to do that is to, even if it's just in the title, to say that the score in 8 measures is for Melba Liston, someone's going to walk away and look up Melba Liston. Yeah. So it's like a way for me to pay homage, but give a gift and pay it forward because, she's amazing.
Well, also what you did with the Rutherford piece, it was a very complex move because you have to trace it back through a couple layers.
Right,
You've got this whole, what is it, and I forgot the name of this because I keep mixing it up, right? It starts with Buñuel, right? What is what's the Buñuel film called? What's that? Is that them doing something? Oh yeah, so it's the gentle influence of the bourgeoisie. Then Rutherford's piece is called The Gentle Harm of the Bourgeoisie, and then Buñuel film is The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie. So there's all this stuff going on. And we should hear a little bit of Paul before, I found a couple of things, including something I did with him and 3 other people in 1976, but that's not so important. I want to start at the beginning. Sort of amazing. I mean, Paul Rutherford was an amazing trombone player. He passed away in 2007. One of the last records he made actually was the 40 Years of Globe Unity, so which we played together on with all those other screaming European American free jazz players. And so but then he started the amazing group Iskra in 1903, which is all connected with Lenin. And so he was always a lifelong, I think, member of the English or British Communist Party. And so that a lot of what he was doing, like the title of Iskra and the gentle harm of the bourgeoisie, it's all connected with political circumstances, which I think you kind of picked up on. And I don't know, maybe, or maybe it was something else. But
Well, I always say that I'm really good at writing the table of contents for a book that I don't have the chops to. So then titles can make these nice sweeping things that you then could unpack.
we have to conspire on these things. So what do you think? Do you think we should open it up for
sure.
questions? Anybody have any comments or questions or anything?
Sandwiches?
Please.
And like there's I don't know how you did it, but like there's this translucent or like luminous color that's like that just get emitted from like the city case, and I just wonder how color functions and how like you came up with these ideas.
Color is complicated. It's really, for me, it's just an activation point. Color is very scary. Color is very scary to me, it is. And it's almost like the place of gray, which I gave a talk at DIA about Agnes Martin, and I'll be on a panel with Richard Tuttle at Guggenheim for Agnes's show as well in December. But I only say that because the kindred connection with Agnes in terms of color and sort of fighting color or muting color. And it works a lot like in the same way as like as muting or sound absorption, in the same way as color being like present but maybe suppressed and then having like an exit. But that glow and that relationship to optics was really kind of a building block for me in terms of smashing those two worlds together to think about the sonic and the optic and what reverberates more than color. And if you condense it down to just that one slice, then it is also about that activation and a little magic, not unlike the Impressionists creating magic and creating light that's there but not there. It's not really an answer, but it's one of those things where color is ephemeral and complicated, and there are pigments that reflect and pigments that absorb. What are you doing?
I'm not doing anything. That's someone out of the audience.
I thought that was
doing
a
that.
new
Yes, please.
So I had a question could be for both of you. I think something that George recognized that sparked something for me was the idea of 30 years later get written back into history.
Mhm.
And then I'm thinking about this in the context for Jennie of what kinds of associations you would want. Are there either contemporary artists or your influences, you know, and I was looking at this and the question about color and then looking at somebody, now I'm just forgetting his name, you can get my name, Vera Heroicus, Subliminus, and minimalism, and some of those things that, like, how you would see yourself connected to some of those things, or the kinds of things you would want to see yourself connected to, the kind of history you might want to be written into. Yeah, so just something for both of you, for George as an historian and you as an artist, how you would want to be associated.
Well, I had one amazing moment at the Manil. Yeah, exactly, and that's perfect because there was an exhibition called Silence, curated by Toby Camps at the Manil collection that looked at this idea of silence, but it was not only multi-generational, but it was totally historic. Some of the works were permanent collection from the Manil, but then there was also Steve Roden and Stephen Vitiello and like kind of my contemporaries who operate in the visual art world but are sound and back and forth. And he chose those two panels from that kitchen exhibition, and I didn't, you know, totally understand his context until I arrived at the show. And the Manila is stunning because it's all natural light. It's a very beautiful space. And I walk in and there's Rauschenberg's white paintings, my black paintings, and Cage, his score under glass in the center of this room. And I was like, well, that's it. Because it's about punching the holes in those narratives, and it's also about, you know, even if you just read it on the simple black-white level, formalist level, it's pushing that conversation open. And so in that sense, I mean, who wouldn't? I mean, I'm like, the Guggenheim just asked me to speak for Agnes's show. Are you kidding me? I mean, that's how I feel about it, is like, are you kidding me? But that's an amazing context, and as long as we can, you know, expand, if I can help by talking about modernism or minimalism to help us expand that conversation, then that's a worthy cause, you know.
Just the fact of you turning up and, she's the one that talks about it? Y'all saw that thing in the news, right, about the doctor on the plane? Yeah. Right? I won't go into that. But I mean, you know this thing, you see it on the news? I mean, there was some guy who collapsed on the plane, and they asked for a doctor. And the African-American woman raised her hand and said, I'm a doctor. She said, oh, no, we don't want you. We want a real doctor. So it's like, you know, what? But I mean, the thing is that in certain scenes, just turning up and being the unexpected voice, that's how I seduce people into listening to music they would ordinarily hate, like Schoenberg. You know, I walk in and I tell them, you know, this music changed, which is true. This music changed my life. I was taken by it. It really made me who I am today. You know, it was like the way I heard Wynton Marsalis talking about Louis Armstrong. You know, the same kind of thing, except that was more like the expected homology. But for these young people that, you know, in these classes, it's like, oh, you're the one talking about this. That's very unusual for them. So oftentimes you embody that kind of punching holes in the narrative just by turning up. But we're all trying to do it our own ways. I mean, just you got to punch those holes because there's a lot that needs kind of doing. And, you know, someone like you and your work, not just you, but your work, it embodies change. It embodies the possibility that things could be different than they are. They come out of a show like this, and they say, wow, that was really different. I wonder what else could be different around here. And that's when you start to find that real change is made possible through what you do, you know, what you're doing. Are there other kind of, I'm sure, come on, y'all. Yeah.
I just thought about minimalism because some of the greatest minimalist experiences I've had have come from Africa many ways to me, usurped and spoken about and not given credit as an inspiration and a source of thought.
You're at Yale now.
No, I'm not.
No, no, well, we used to joke about that back in the day, Douglas. You know about that. The Johnny Slag period in our lives. And, but Jennie is making change at Yale University, which is sort of my undergraduate alma mater. And I'm saying that to say that one of the people who, I don't know, for all I know, he might still be teaching people and subverting people, is Robert Farris Thompson.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember in 1970 going to his class, which is, there are generations of people who have taken this class. I mean, Brett Hayes Edwards, I think, who was it, Kelly Jones. You know, I took this class really a decade or two before them. But it was exactly the same. The first lecture would be, he would show these African sculptures, these Congo sculptures. He would talk about rhythms and textiles. And then he would show you Modigliani. And he'd say, why are these, one of these things is exactly like the other. And so, but why are they put in separate spaces?
Yep.
So that's what I'm getting to. I don't know the specific examples you're talking about, but the models of what would be called in some cases appropriation, but I would look at it not as appropriation, but as disaggregation or exnomination. Let's not name these things. Let's take this out of the picture. We put it in a separate space, and we normalize that separation when really we don't need to normalize it, and gets in the whole session of what's art and what's not, you know. So this is in the very first day of class that he would do this, and so it got you thinking along the lines that you just said. Yes?
Jenny, I was wondering if the materiality of your work, and I'm thinking specifically about these, the sound voice systems, whether it's been received in such a way that it's always necessarily in dialogue with the pieces around it or the space that it's in, and whether that puts undue pressure on that work in ways that we might not, because it deals with sound, we might not put such pressure on more conventional painting.
Right. I think that they also deal with profoundly, for me, they deal with silence. I think that they're as workhorse pieces and as pieces that I consider active, even if they're in a room where there's just the human voice or just your breath, they're on a very microscopic level profoundly affecting the sonics in the space with or without sound pieces. I've had a lot of work shown without sound, and it's totally acceptable to me. Also, frustratingly for curators and museum guards, the closer you get to them, the denser, the softer it is. And the first exhibition that I had, specifically all black panels, it was quite a surprise at the opening to have people looking around for where the sound was coming from and immediately go to one of the wall pieces and lean in because they thought it was emanating the sound, but then they get totally hoodwinked because the closer they got, the quieter it got, and it was sort of this strange push-pull relationship that I didn't anticipate being so profound. Amy.
Well, I have a ton of questions, but museum guys can't hog the Q&A.
But go right ahead.
I guess you opened it up, Jenny, when you talked about being, having a lot of heartache with the way that the contemporary art world is extremely driven by market forces right now, and then the difference with, a gallery system versus what a sound artist and a musician might deal with in terms of commercialization and just, buying and selling of work. I'm specifically interested in how you are both viewing museums, both public and private, from the position of museums being very interested in performance-based and live works
Yeah.
because they engage a public in
Yeah.
a different way than visual works, static works do. And in addition, I mean, we've been joking, people that I know, about how that every museum right now has a public program with artists of color.
Yeah.
And that there's a big difference between doing a public program and doing an exhibition, just to say on a budgetary level. But it's very in the moment for cultural institutions to diversify, engage. What is it? Diversity, engagement, inclusion.
There's a new acronym. I don't know.
Want to say anything about that? Since
That's a lot. One of the only places I always say yes to doing public programs is the Studio Museum. And then other institutions, I've had my moment where I'm like, did you ask the last 3 white guys that had shows here to do a public program? Because there's always a lot of cameras that pop up so that when they write their next round of grants, they have like the black lady that did the thing at the museum so they can get the education. I mean, it's a thing. I don't know, a lot of it, like I used to talk about how Miles Davis turned his back on his audience when he performed, and then you were sort of only able to witness him doing his thing. He wasn't performing for you. And a lot, I think of visual artists that are not good at public programs or speaking, or they're not performative in their practice at all, get put in these positions where they have to be. I mean, even 5 years ago, I'm less nervous mainly because George is the shit, and I would show up anywhere that he was. But I'm less nervous today because it's this kind of setting, but I'm not one of those people that wants to be performative. And it is a big deal, and it's written into budgets, and it's part of your artist fee, and it's part of what's expected of you.
You know, there's a quote up on the wall that ends the didactic here on Endless Shout that quotes filmmaker Arthur Jaffa about what America cared about black people as much as it cares about black culture. And, you know, what you were just saying about being kind of tokenized, obviously, and then promoted and putting a good face on certain institutions, it also reminds me of something Hilton Als has written, which I'm misquoting, but just this, he talks about this moment of being in a car with a friend or a lover and feeling a spotlight shine through the back window and realizing that, you know, that a black man and a white man in the back of the car is a dangerous situation for the police who've turned on their lights. But that he makes that metaphor bigger, that as a black man, he is always in the spotlight, and there's a spotlight you know, like there's a lot of attention that certain people in America draw.
Whew. Just a light note, Amy. You're so light.
I think it's a little bit too loud there. Yeah, I mean, can you turn it down just a tad? Thanks. You know, I think we kind of have to look at these in an intersectional way, you know. You know, it's a lot of, you know, the problems that the U.S. and other countries in the world have with race are obviously not limited to the U.S.'s sort of dominant, historically situated black-white binary. There's all these other, we're noticing that it's going to be much more complicated than that. And so people are, I'm not saying that you're doing that, but I'm saying that one of the things that you start to see is that sound, culture, music, all of these commodifications of sound are very much driven in part by the relationship between race and genre and location. So one of the things I've enjoyed about what Jennie does is it makes me clear on certain things. I'm going to say maybe this is a little bit too, maybe maybe it's one of these things where the grass is greener on the other side. Like, you know, I do some things that could be categorized as sound art, but I basically sit at home and compose music or play or whatever. I don't play that much now, but I mean, composing music. And so one of the things I like about what you're doing is you can draw from these things, but you don't have to have Beethoven looking over your shoulder. You're not doing it right. Or Coltrane or anybody, you know, all these people who want, well, what about the influence of Coltrane on this piece? Say, well, Coltrane can't influence everything. At a certain point, you know, you might not be thinking about that. And so certain kinds of freedom that you have by not having to, I mean, sound art, relatively new. It has a long history, but still there's a recrudescence of interest, there's a new interest. Galleries and institutions are starting to take it a lot more seriously, starting to look at it in other ways. And so, I don't know, I mean, do you feel kind of free to ignore the musical histories, or do you feel that you have to incorporate them? Do you work against them? Do you subvert them?
I often feel guilty that I'm bastardizing things that are sacred to some people through, you know, digital editing and manipulating, but I just have tremendous Midwestern Catholic guilt in my DNA somehow. So I feel guilty.
Well,
like,
that's right. We didn't talk about you.
everything.
Midwestern. Which part of the Midwest?
Ohio.
Ohio, Chicago. Not a Catholic, but.
But I brought this up before, but we were at the Art Institute at the same time.
Yeah, that's right. Well, somehow we didn't meet. That was like
Because I was in the upstairs with the painters pulling my hair out, and I remember seeing you like down on the lower level with all the equipment and oscilloscopes and things.
Art and technology people. Well, you know what? We might have to stop because I see Douglas Ewart has left the room, and that means he's getting ready for the performance with Nigel Whitson, which is going to happen at about a little over half an hour. So I just wanted to please thank Jennie C. Jones for
Thank you. I wanted George to wear a shirt that said "I'm with Dummy" with an arrow. I was totally going to make an iron-on to make you wear that.
And we'll see you all at 2 o'clock for the performance, and also at 7 o'clock at the International House for the showing of. Before you leave, can I do a little preview? Would you guys mind terribly? Just give me 1 second, and I'm going to show you what's going to happen at 7 o'clock. Here we are, okay? I'm going to show you what's going to happen at 7 o'clock. Okay, now we're going to put that on, fit it to the screen, and we're going to fit it to this other screen I think we have to do now.